Hello,
Hi.
everyone. Good morning and a very good welcome to all of you, the distinguished panelists, and also all participants who are joining this webinar at Zoom or through CSIS YouTube channel. Welcome to our event. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Noory Okthariza. I am a researcher at CSIS Indonesia. I'll be moderating this webinar for the next 1.5 hours. So today we're going to have the second webinar about democratic resilience in Indonesia and South Korea. We're going to compare democratic trajectories of these two countries. We're going to see it from various perspectives. For instance, from the role of religious groups perspective, the role of NGO, social movement, and also from populist aspect. And in case if you missed it or you're just interested in, the first webinar already done yesterday. So please go to CSIS YouTube channel because we have already uploaded the yesterday discussions at our channel. I'd like to acknowledge that this event has been made possible due to the collaborative works between CSIS Indonesia and also Korea Foundation in carrying out research about democratic resilience in the two countries. All the panelists today are involved in the research process. Each of them is writing an article about their own topics from which our discussions will be drawn. So the main theme for today's discussion is about state, society, and democratization in Indonesia and South Korea. We already have the 4 panelists joining with us today, and I'm just going to mention the names as well as the order of the speakers. The first speaker is Dr. Vidhyandika Perkasa. He is the head of the Department of Politics and Social Change at CSIS. The second one is Dr. Medelina Hendytio. She is the Deputy Executive Director of CSIS. The third panelist is Professor Sang Jin. He is the Emeritus Professor at the Department of Sociology from Seoul National University. And the last one is Mr. Arya Fernandes, a researcher from the Department of Politics and Social Change at CSIS. Each speaker is supposed to present the topic more or less in 15 minutes. So please stick to the time limit so that we have enough time for the Q&A session. And without further ado, I'm just going to give the first chance to Dr. Vidhyandika Perkasa, who will be talking about strategizing religious oppression, Christianity, and Indonesia democracy resilience. Mas Vidya, the screen is yours.
Thanks, Ota. Okay, good morning, Professor Han, my colleagues at CSIS, and also participants of this webinar. I conduct this research on strategizing religious oppression with the assistance of my colleague Medelina Bonita. And my paper is on religion as part of a society-state nexus. I think in this session, there will be other elements of society, that's NGO, social movement, and also civil society. And we will observe how they intertwine with state, which could, of course, produce both positive and negative impact towards democratic resilience. Now, please allow me to pose 2 kinds of premises, which relates to my study. First premises is religious harmony, which uphold tolerance and the respect of pluralism, will contribute towards strengthening the resiliency of democracy. And I apologize for using such kind of harsh words, which is oppression, which denotes the meaning of persecution, abuse, or maltreatment to kind of observe this phenomenon, because in fact, as yesterday also my colleague Phillips have mentioned, that there are still challenges in Indonesia's democracy. And in fact, he also presented various statistics which categorize Indonesia as probably a failed democracy, and also with a bleak religious atmosphere, which all direct us to that we have a problem of religious crisis, especially which relates to the majority and minority relationship. So the second premises is religious cohesiveness, both external or inter-religion collaboration and internal, is a key survival in the midst of oppression. So I'm not saying that if intense oppression intensified, it will result in the extinction of particular religion. It's not that case. But however, minority religion still needs to have the strategy to refer to oppression, because otherwise the minority groups space for religious freedom will be even more shrinking, and of course, as the result, inequality of freedom uh, will allow more space for the majority rather than the minority groups. So the aim of my paper or my presentation this morning is actually to observe or identify what is actually the strategies conducted by Christianity. Here means both the Protestant and the Catholic, uh, amidst the experience of religious oppression and discrimination. So what factors contribute towards their survival, and what challenges they face with this religious oppression atmosphere? So the structure of my presentation is as follows. First of all, I will just briefly touch conceptually on positioning religion democracy. My colleague Phillips have also mentioned this yesterday, and also some facts on religion oppression. And the third is on enabling factors of religious oppression and intolerance. And finally, the strategizing oppression and challenges. Now, just a brief discussion on this positioning religion and democracy. I mean, there are various literatures which kind of discuss and debate religion and democracy. For example, the old school of thought kinds of position themselves that there's no correlation, there's no relevancy if we talk about democracy and religion. Democracy is a product of modernization, and with that, religion will be winding down, and will be less significance to discuss about. So there's the words modernization up and religion is going down. But I think nowadays, if we observe the phenomenon, what's happening globally or even Indonesia, those two distinct ideas are pretty much linked in many ways, right? For example, there are many literatures which discuss interaction, tension, possibilities, or even competition, adaptation, cooperation, and among religion and with democracy. And one famous debate is, of course, is whether Islam and democracy is compatible ones with the other. So in this instance, so there are changing strategies. So the Islam tends to be more compliance with democratic norms, and they will try to find widen access to state power to avoid exclusion, of course. Yeah. So there's also various dichotomy whether on culturalist or structuralist instrument approach to discuss this. But in short, we now acknowledge that religion becomes an integral role in supporting key foundation of democracy, yeah? And they have an intertwined relation. But we also have to acknowledge that the interaction between religion and democracy both can result in positive and negative impact. So this is just an example of the positive impact is how democracy kind of help religion in building consensus or or making reinterpretation of religious dogma. And also many churches at the time, especially in the European countries, devote much wealth to build religious institution. To build education institution to educate about democratic principle. But there is also some negative aspect of that. But for sure, this is pretty much manifest these days in Indonesia, is that religion is used as a tool for political opposition. Now we can see that recently happening, right? How religion tends to use the narrative that it exists as an alternative ideology to a failed secular state. Yeah, it is a way to criticize the government of mishandling the situation, for example, mishandling the COVID-19, and they propose alternative ideology to replace the state. So in that case, as I quote by Cisari, there are positive and negative role of religion that can be analyzed in a magnetic field created by the interaction of state, religion, and political actors all competing to define religion, politics, and democracy. So the role of state, in bracket, the role of regime, actually is important political actors creating the national habitus for the politicization of religion. So we can see that in an Indonesian case, that using religion tends to be a fertile ground for opposition, a fertile ground for power struggle in this sense. No religion tradition is anti-democratic per se, but certain forms of state-religion interaction are anti-democratic, such as regulating, restricting on privileged religious activities. Hegemon and religious nationalism negatively affect civil liberties and exacerbate social hostility and the impediment of democracy. So those two last points become or will lead us to the uh, substantive element of my presentation. So just a few examples how the intertwine between religion and democracy in the Indonesian case, despite many others examples. For example, that of course religion have interests and practices, but that should be contained in a religious institution or as a private domain. But in fact, religious interests and practices are enforced in public arena. For example, there are many local regulation that have the compulsory element for people to use hijab in public school with sanction, and also housing complex with a religious tone, tourism, and so forth and so forth. So in this case, religious interest is accommodated in the democratic space, which benefit the majority. And democracy facilitate the proliferation of religious expression without control. So this is a true situation in Indonesia. And of course, if we talk about election, political identity and election intensify in this case. Now, this is just a few examples of types of religious oppression that Indonesia is currently facing. For example, the violation of the rights of religion, violation of the rights of worship. We all know that violation of the right to religious practices. Even there's violation to the rights of funeral, and also violation to the rights of commemorating religious holidays. And there's also hate speech, intimidation, threats, and so forth and so forth. There are many institutions or that have conduct a really in-depth study on these matters. So this is another data which shows virus oppression. I just want to quote one point from Damayanti, even though it's not really up-to-date data, that since 1998 to 2015, there are about 643 churches that have been restricted in 17 years, with 238 churches were attacked and destroyed and stoned and exploded. 111 churches were threatened or rejected, and 53 churches were sealed and 241 churches were closed or banned. So there are this is that data which Diamante managed to gather in terms of oppression within the minority. And this is also just a quick highlight of various oppression that we have experienced. Of course, it deals with building religious worship, and of course, there's also rights of funeral that the minority are neglected to be buried in a seminar, and then even though if they are entitled to be buried there, then they must remove the cross, and also which recently occurred in Indonesia is of course the Sigi attack, and this is quite ironic because from my personal observation, it's quite a minimum in media exposure in of reporting this case, and also it's gonna be a big question mark for all of us whether the government will have a proper handling in resolving this case, and also there are many denial I mean made by the government that this is just attack on houses and not on churches and so forth. So this is just a few few example. Now, what are the enabling factors of religious oppression and intolerance? I think there's a long list of that. I'm just going to go quite quickly on this. First, of course, the interpretation of Pancasila and religious articles in the Undang-Undang 45, Undang-Undang Dasar 45. I think those 2 points are both historical and regulation, but they both conclude that Indonesia is in fact strong in religious element, right? Because historically we've been dealing with during the birth of Indonesia, whether Indonesia should be a secular state or religious state, but finally As time progress, there's also the discourse on the Khilafah, and finally, there's also the discourse of the Islamization of Pancasila, or even the discourse on NKRI Sharia. And the religious articles in Undang-Undang Dasar 45 also mention a lot of articles using the words religion, and also um, uh, articles which kind of discriminate towards the minority. The third element is, of course, the politicized blasphemy law. I don't need to explain this because there are many cases which have criminalized the minority, and the law has been used for instrument of minority oppression in this sense. And also, there's also problematic in the letter of the minister, especially the Surat Bersama Menteri, which regulates the building of religious buildings or worship. This is very prone to narrow interpretation. So when we did the interview in several cities, there are actually um, some substance of this regulation which has not been properly socialized, and so the society lack the understanding to how to implement this regulation. For example, the requirement that to build a religious worship needs a 60 signature from the community. Actually, if it has not been fulfilled, we could expand the coverage of the territory, not only to the village, probably to the sub-district or even to the province. So that's the kind of thing that many people do not understand. And also, there's also the clause which, if there's a rejection in building a religious um, building, then the local leader must find a alternative place. And it is in many cases this has not been materialized or fulfilled. Now, the next important element is, of course, the Christianization phobia. I kind of use this term because this Christianization phobia has been part of the Islamic rhetoric, yeah, which kind of justify oppression to Christian rituals and practices. We build people reject the Christian or the minority to build just because of the fear of Christianization, or even they conducted a social assistance. Of course, there's another fear of Christian phobia, but I do not deny that in some case there are also small element of organization which is conducting this, and you can see that, or you can read that in the report of the ICG 114/2010, where small element of Christian organization conduct Christianization. For example, Yayasan Mahani, but they all face public pressure, and I think uh, they do not exist anymore in the sense. But still, even though all the activities are banned, the phobia sustained. And of course, we cannot deny that the religious motive cut across politics and economic. For example, there tends to be the unity symbol of majority because of the fear of Christianization. And if we observe election and so forth, tolerance may not be popular as election campaign theme. And there's also some candidate which use closing churches as ways to get voters and sympathy. So actually, the Christianization phobia is, the essence of it is, of course, conversion. And conversion in all religion actually is it's a common issue, whether that external or internal. Even the Christianization itself face their own conversion issues. So we also know that historically the Christian is also closely to the missionaries, and also there's the Dakwa. And the media tends to also exacerbate religious tension, like using conversion as a media consumption. Conversion, which is actually should be a private thing, become a public domain. And also, if we talk about feeling threatened, it goes both ways. The Islam might be having fear of the Christianization, but the minority or the Christian might have the same feeling of becoming Indonesia becoming an Islamic state. So actually, the feeling threatened goes both ways. And the other factor is, of course, the transition of the New Order to Reformasi. You all know that during the New Order, the Islam has been suppressed, giving more role for the Abangan and the Christian, and there's also issues of economic and political injustice, and there's also effect of the Middle East effect, what's happening there, influenced Indonesia. And from our interviews, people also mentioned that even though the Darul Islam has been dismantled, but the connection is still there, an inspiring struggle. And there's also element of weak understanding of religious dogma. There's a instant ulama, and the media is mushrooming, and people use the media as a source of religious information, which we can question the validation of the teaching through the media, and also the role of OME, sometimes exacerbating religious tension and legitimate violence. And this one important aspect in this case is, of course, the weak, less committed, unneutral, and decisive illusion of state and security apparatus to manage religious minority oppression. So we call it with the word pembiaran. So there's just a few example of the PBM which we observe. I'm just gonna skip that. So now I come to the strategizing element of this research. So the question now is, what have the Christian actually organized to maintain their survival and existence as religious belief? Uh, we can classify this into two. First is the external and the strategies, and the second is the internal. The external strategy is constitute effort to maintain networking with other religion or with element of civil society organization. So this is what most of the Christians are doing. The internal strategies covers ways which Christian or Catholic as institutionalized religion implement to survive with religious within religious discrimination and by the majority. This is how the Christianity consolidate themselves in facing oppression. So according to Hefner, what are those? He mentioned that the panacea of avoiding or of this oppression is, of course, we must collaborate intensively and extensively with the moderate Muslim. In this case, is the NO and the Muhammadiyah. So the second one, as I mentioned before, is having more intense collaboration with many other stakeholders, for example NGOs or university or think tanks. And this has shown a success story when we talk about the undang-undang pesantren or auto regulation bill of the pesantren, which uh, which was finally canceled a few of the clausel because of the rejection as the output of this collaboration with among various stakeholders. And the other example is, I think it's a rather a breakthrough, is how we have the courage to kind of uh, create cooperation with the conservative Muslim. This has been done by Paulo Sugeng Wijaya in Solo, who initiate a cooperation between Hizbullah extremist group and Christian to provide humanitarian assistance during an earthquake and that struck in Jakarta. This, I think, it's a good example of how can we make a breakthrough to construct collaboration even with the conservative Muslim. And for the Catholic Church, of course, there's a compulsory for them to build collaboration with other religions, right, in the form of social assistance, scholarship, cooperation, or even health facilities through their commission of ecumenical and interfaith religions. This is, I think, it's very written down in their regulation. So again, just to sum up the strategies, of course, the first three boxes on the top explain that we need interreligion collaboration. We need stronger cooperation between Christian and Muslim, and also we need a more diverse format of this collaboration. I can say that all of these three is important, is a necessity, but I still personally view that it's still insufficient. Insufficient. I will explain that later. And of course, there's also we need a more synergistic collaboration with GSO and other stakeholders, especially the legislative members. And there have been also many initiatives gathering those stakeholders in discussing problematic regulation and bills. And of course, there's also need soft power approach. I mean, this soft power approach means that we need to give assistance towards the needed people in terms of social assistance, health or education. And of course, this based from my interview with a priest, he mentioned that we have to be nice with the people who dislike us. So I think this is part of the Christianity teaching as one strategy to build the harmony relationship. So despite all of the external strategy, of course, the threat or the macro environment challenges still relies on the narrative of proselytization or Christianization, because even though it's probably a small element of the Christian are doing this, but however, this is still a narrative which until now has not been resolved. And for the Christian itself, sometimes by doing a conversion, it will bring them a heavily win for them. But I think it's the dominant the dominant denomination of Christianity do not perform such thing intentionally. I mean, it's more to a calling, spiritual calling, if people want to convert to other religion. And the other one is, of course, the FKUB, who holds central role in conflict mechanism. I cannot say there are one single picture of how FKUB performs. Some says it's useful, but some says that it has many weaknesses because they have many self-interest, and of course, in some cases, for example, in West Java, there are lack of funds to kind of construct program on such issues. And of course, due to the media or social media spreading of it's going to make people to to acknowledge themselves as religious leader, and usually in their teaching they kind of strictly use polarize between us and them. So if you don't follow our teaching, then you are different. So there's a more the distinction between us and them. uh, Economic inequality and social gap, it's part of the problem as well. Usually it occurs in the exclusion of Christianity in a particular environment, and that create, of course, complication towards how to build mutual trust. And of course, there's regulation, which I explained earlier about even though there's regulation, but it's not well implemented. If there's no regulation, it's even creating the problem more worse. And one of my criticism of the ineffective strategy external is, of course, even though there are interaction, there are collaboration, but usually the topic of discussion are only limited to issues such as poverty, terrorism, disaster management. But in fact, um, there is the need to kind of touch dogma. So we need to understand what is Islam. For the Christian, for the Christian, we need to understand what is Islam. So it's more a dogmatic teaching that we have to have a breakthrough to kind of create or construct. Now, there's a good quote which I took from Sumanto Al-Qudrupi, a lecturer in Saudi, with when he talked about pluralism. I mean, he mentioned that pluralism is an active seeking of understanding across lines of differences. This is important, I think. Active seeking. So tolerance is not understanding you are Christian and I'm Muslim, but we have to dig further to make more active seeking of why we are different. It's no right or wrong endeavor, but it is necessary. So this kind of things, this interaction with touch on a dogmatic aspect, much needs to be mainstream, not especially among religious leaders, policy-wise, and of course at the grassroots level. So this now quickly I will go to the internal strategies. Of course, this is among Christian, especially that uh, Christianity is very diverse, especially the Protestant in terms of their denomination. So in this case, there's also, of course, dogmatic differences, which kind of impede internal collaboration. So some tends to avoid talking about dogmatic differences, and they just do collaboration in social assistance, such in health, on education, and social care. But as Hoon stated in his article, even though there are many differences and of debate on even on dogmatic Christianity, but some churches tends to cooperate in many ways. For example, by exchanging pastor or in a sermon as a way to welcome differences in the many denomination. So this is just a summary of the internal strategy. So they are doing a lot of political education to the congregation and to like the members of the PRD, cooperation within Christian school and university, collaboration during holidays, cooperation inter-Christian, But again, as I mentioned before, we do not touch on dogmatic things, but only on economic and on issue of economic and nationalism. And there tends to be more issues discussed these days, such as political participation, intolerance, and issue of proselytization. And there are more now actively arise political activism among the Christian. But still, despite all of this strategy, I still question uh, what has this strategies bring output towards lessening or oppression that the Christianity face. So the challenges of the internal strategy, of course, we are all the Christianity are suspicious one to another because of the diverse dogmatic, and there's also suspicion of congregation grabbing. There's also family dynasty. So conversion itself is a sensitive issues among Christianity, and there's also dogmatic debate and spurty. One claim that one religion is more superior and more truthful than the others, and of course there's also the phenomenon of the independent urban churches. I think that it also happened in the South Korean context. So one of the indicators of a successful Christianity faith building is, of course, if we have more churches, but this tends to create in an individualistic uh, atmosphere among Christian, and they are less concerned on oppression issues. And for the Catholic, even though structurally they are prohibited to associate with politics, there are sometimes, yeah, I think that this goes also to Protestant, the minority complex behavior. They sees that in order to change oppression, it's a political matter, and they're very in fear to be involved in political matters because of the minority complex. And the other less factors which kind of impede the effort to combat oppression is, of course, the Christians' understanding of glorifying suffering. This one it's noted in the Bible, Matthew 11:29. So it's okay, but we can suffer, we can be oppressed because that's part of our destiny as a Christian. So that it create a fatalistic behavior on that. So let me conclude by posing a few points of notes and also some recommendation. First, of course, religious oppression is a threat to Indonesia's democratic resilience. So it's a basically could be a ideological threat, whether to Pancasila or unity and diversity, which should be promoted and uphold actually. Secondly, of course, we have problem of indecisive state, which exacerbate religious tension. So I think this is a really important element that we must resolve. So without a strong state on this, I think we're not going to go anywhere. And there's also a popular conception that Christian as a minority must comply to the rules and norms set by the majority. So whatever you do, you do not harm the interests of the majority. And of course, there's also the main problem is the inconsistency of the law enforcement, especially in enforcing the 2006 BPM. And we all know that some regulations are indeed politicized. Yeah. So the Catholic, in our view, tends to be more cohesive in building strategies against discrimination due to the top-down hierarchical system. But unfortunately, the Christian, the Protestant, tends to be more polarized due to doctrinal differences and interests. Therefore, we cannot expect that they would have one cohesive strategies uh, that to combat for oppression. So what should we do on these matters? First, for the regulation, the BBM. Of course, many has stigmatized this BPM as discriminative, but I don't see. Probably, I don't know whether there are any efforts to revise it. But I think for the time being, we need to push for a more intense socialization, substance-wise, to avoid narrow interpretation. So I think all the people should understand what is actually because people say that the BPM have both a positive and negative aspect. So we want to kind of push the positive aspect to be really implemented. Now we also have the RUU on pelindungan terhadap umat beragama. I'm not saying that it is a perfect RUU, but probably we need to re-examine whether this needs to be further re-examined to kind of balance the PBM. And of course, there needs to be a collaboration and communication among religion, which should touch on dogmatic elements, as I mentioned before. So not purely on avoiding those dogmatic elements. So the next one is, of course, involving conservative groups into the dialogue and collaboration. This needs a breakthrough. This needs courage. Expanding collaboration with more elements of civil society on religious harmony issues. So this has been done, but I think we need to intensify more. Promote and intensify communication and collaboration from grassroots on religious tolerance. I think this is important because the essence of the strategy is to build local resilience, because there are many cases when some community has been attacked by the outsider, it's been assisted by the local community. And lastly is, of course, we need a strong and decisive state to defend the rights of the minority. This is the big challenge, and we just don't know how could we pursue this to assist the oppression for the minority. I think that's it. I'll end my presentation. Thank you. Back to you, Okta.
Thank you, Dr. Vidhyandika Perkasa, for touching upon a rarely explored topic, I think, with regard to the state and religious relationship in Indonesia. Okay, I'm just gonna go straight to the second speaker, Dr. Medelina Hendytio. She'll be talking about the resilience of democracy and social movement in Indonesia since the 1998 reform. But before that, I would like to encourage all participants, if you have questions to all the panelists or one of the panelists, you can use the chat box at Zoom and also at CSIS YouTube channel. Put your question there. Put your questions there, and then the panelists will answer the questions after the presentations. Ibu Medelina, the screen is yours. Bu Medelina, I think you need to unmute. It's still muted. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Okta. Good morning, everyone. My presentation this morning is about democratic resilience and social movement in Indonesia since the 1998 reform. Please allow me to share my screen with you. Is it already appear in the, no? Do you see the slide?
No, it's not yet appearing in my screen, Bu.
Well, I think then sorry, let me try once again. Well, would you please to help me, because I don't know why it cannot be.
Belt?
Sure. Yes, he will help.
Okay. Now it's appearing. It's there.
Okay. Then I think I need to F5, yeah. Okay. Yeah. As indicated in the yesterday discussion, that rights of association and organization indicator is important element in country's democratization process. This is in line with Freedom House that assess quality of country's democracy based on two broad categories, mainly the political rights and the civil liberties. One indicator of the civil liberties is rights of association and organization. In my opinion, right of association and organization can be seen from the existence and the role of the civil society movement. As stated by Tilly, the emergence of civil society participation is the form of social movement reflects citizen political participation that carries the themes of change and demands a more democratic life. I take labor union and peasant organization to represent social movement for a number of reasons. Firstly, they organize to change or sustain changes in the structure of society by using resources through forms of political participation, such as protesting, opposing government policies and regulation. Secondly, the labor and farmers organization occupy a special place among the forces of other civil society because they have a large and effective capacity to carry out mobilization in times of crisis in a country. The labor movement, according to Webb since 19th century, has been declared as an essential element for democracy. This departs from the democratic practices used at their organizational level. In spite of their different social, economic, and political contexts, labor movement and farmer movement in Indonesia have similarities in the characteristic and the basis of organizing and struggle strategies with the labor and peasant movement in many other countries. The two organizations face common challenges, which are injustice and low level of welfare, primarily due to poor public policies, which fail to accommodate the various interests of groups in society. Then to assess how these two movements contribute to strengthening democracy, I'd like to pose several questions. How a labor union and peasant movement, together with other social movement in Indonesia, participate in the democratic process by taking advantage of the available political opportunity structure? Are they able to form a more inclusive social and political system that can reflect people's expectation and be more responsive to public desires? As representative of the community, how do they participate in the decision-making process and obtain political influence so that the power is not only concentrated in the government or particular group? In answering the above question, I will discuss about the political opportunities that open up since the Reformation, then describe how these two groups struggled to advance their causes and improve their welfare in the post-authoritarian periods. How do they strategize and network with other civil society organizations to strengthen their position and bargaining power, to gain more access not only to economic resources, but also to political influence? Social movement in Indonesia have been progressing since the beginning of the democratization process in 1998. Since the 1998 reforms, Indonesia's democratic political system continued to be reinforced through various improvement of institution, laws, and political culture, which caused political opportunity structure emerge. The strong basis was the 1945 Constitution Amendment in Article 28E, stated that everyone has the right to associate and advance form of confirmation from the original Article 28. The issuance of Law Number 22 of 1999 concerning regional government, which became effective in 2001, is one of the pillars of strengthening democracy, since it has managed to eliminate the centralization of authority. this encouraging community to participate in the development to improve welfare and justice. Political culture is moving into more democratic attitude with freedom of expression as well as fair and democratic election. In this situation, political opportunity structure form a momentum where social movement utilizes to emerge and grow significantly. Political opportunity structure is opportunities and constraints in a particular political system or political environment and existing institution. The structure of political opportunity includes the level of openness, the degree of stability of the ruling elite, the grouping and division of the elite, and the capacity of the state and the degree of its tendency to oppress. I think I will move to this activities of Indonesian labor union. Almost at the same time, workers' organization in Indonesia have become very active. The movement emerged in tandem with the growth of the urban working class with low wages and working for export-oriented companies, which became the backbone of Indonesia economic growth after the fall of the oil prices in 80s. The movement was strengthened by Law Number 21 of 2000 that recognized freedom of association, assembly, expression of thoughts, both verbally and in writing, is the right of every citizen. One of the success of the labor movement in decision-making process was the establishment of the Social Security Management Agency or BPJS. This gain was achieved by building cooperation with other civil society organizations and also with Member of Parliament. Another achievement of labor union in advocating their aspiration was the increasing regional minimum wage or upah minimum regional, where hundreds of labor strikes that occurred between 1999 and 2000, as well as large demonstration at the end of 2012, have pushed up the regional minimum wage in 2013. The UMP or regional minimum wage rose relatively high with the average of around 20%. In Jakarta, even they have risen by 44% compared to 2012. The peasant movement after the new order grew in line with the strengthening of civil society. Peasant organizations do not emerge on the initiative of farmers themselves, but are driven by other community movements such as youth movement and NGOs. The aim of the farmers movement is basically responding to the impact of the Green Revolution, which has oppositely benefited cooperation and large plantation, and has exacerbated by poverty rates of agricultural laborers or smallholders. Agricultural policies since the New Order era have widened the concentration of land tenure for business interests and limited the land access for locals benefit their life. In the early 90s, NGO group with a farmer organization and activists formed the Agrarian Reform Consortium. The movement also encouraged the MPR to issue MPR decree concerning agrarian reform and natural resources management. This MPR decree has opened up larger space for the development of land occupation by farmers, but also provide an opportunity for efforts to gain legal recognition and land rights. Besides lobbying in fighting for the objective, the peasant movement is also taking political action. They are actively carrying out collective action of land occupation and land reclaiming. Besides working with communities in empowering their organization, the two movements also working on electoral politics. Electoral politics is also a choice of social movement strategy, especially to strengthen the existence and at the same time strengthen democracy. The success of the labor parties in South Korea, Britain, and Germany in carrying out electoral politics to gain political influence and power to push the socio-political agenda became a model and aspiration for the implementation of electoral politics for the labor movement in Indonesia. For the labor movement, the electoral politics strategy has several objectives. First, to ensure the elected leaders at both the local and national levels are aligned with their interests. Second, to get parliamentary seats to uplift broader social issues while taking part in the formulation of policies that are important for the democratic process. Third, to build a strong collective identity that benefits them in strengthening their internal solidity. For labor union, efforts to establish a labor party in Indonesia have strived for a long time. After the reform, several labor parties emerged and participated in several elections. But none of these parties won seats in the DPR. The issuance of law number 2 of 2008 concerning political parties which impose stricter rules to establish political parties has made it more difficult for labor movement to form a new political parties. In the case of peasant movement, farmers also see that to achieve goals and demands is not sufficiently championed through the mobilization of its own members. Peasant movement uses electoral politics and short-term political agenda to influence political decision, both at the local and national level. Although it has succeeded in consolidation, which made it possible to form political network, the party efforts to take part in the 2009 election have failed because they are deemed to have not met the administrative requirement by the Ministry of Law and Human Rights. There were some individuals who were initially supported by peasant movement when participating in legislative election. However, after gaining seat, they did not automatically represent peasant voice or aspiration in parliament. They are only concerned with their personal interests. Now I will continue with challenges faced by the two organizations. Although the labor and peasant farmer movement can achieve some of their goals, there are many challenges faced by both movements. The labor movement and peasant movement in Indonesia in general have difficulties in gaining a place in the national, social, and political sphere. Biller, for example, opines that after 32 years of repression by Suharto New Order regime, workers' organizations lost their significance in Indonesian politics. The technical capacity of labor unions at the factory or grassroots level is weak. The voice of workers in Indonesia is inadequate to encourage intense lobbying with both employers and with the government. The labor movement is not integrated at the regional level and is divided within the national political center. Another challenge faced by labor movement is the quality of human resources. Most of the Indonesian workforce has low education. This condition affects the quality and ability of the movement, especially when it comes to lobbying and negotiating at the factory as well as at the national. The labor movement also faces a stagnation of democracy in organizational management because the leaders of the labor movement, especially at the national levels, seems to be irreplaceable, sitting in the leadership chair for a very long time with little agenda for regeneration. In the peasant movement, the main challenge faced its organizational sustainability. Member farmers who have succeeded in obtaining land share or certificate of land ownership no longer want to be active again in a peasant struggle. Second, not all management in farmer organization or movement are democratic. Third, the local-based organization relies on the local context, making it difficult to unite at the national level. It is challenging to push for broader joint agendas, and they are only fighting for the interests of members on the regions that they represent. The prominence of individual political interests over the organization explains why the peasant movement in Indonesia is currently insignificant. The agenda for the agrarian reform is shifting and have become political rhetoric of the social movement rather than an actual struggle. In addition to failing because of organization and resources that are not strong, the failure of peasant electoral politics strategy is also caused by disagreement among the existing peasant organization related to struggle through politics. And as a conclusion, based on the challenges and weakness faced, the social movement in Indonesia has yet to be independent of government influence. Besides weak internal organization structure, the movement is vulnerable to external factors such as economic climate, political support, and financial resources. The limited ability and electoral instrument has rendered labor and farmer movement incapable to carry out political intervention and push for large social community agendas. This is a reflection that the ability to organize and build a culture in non-governmental organization in Indonesia is still weak, and its impact in advancing democracy remains fertile. On the other hand, the political will of state, politicians, and other political forces to open access to social movement are merely based on their political interest. This means that the political system in Indonesia, although appears to be democratic, remains dominated by the conservative political forces and status quo. I think I stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Medelina. Next, we're going to go to the third speaker, Professor Sang Jin. Professor Han is an emeritus professor at the Department of Sociology from Seoul National University in South Korea. He also had several positions at many schools or universities, such as being a visiting professor at Columbia University, School for Advanced Studies in Social Science in Paris, University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and also at Kyoto University in Japan. Professor Han will be talking about populism and democracy in South Korea, changing patterns in politics and civil society. Professor Han, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay. Well, I'm very glad to be able to join this interesting conference today. Vidhyandika, Medelina, Arya, and as well as Noory. Well, how are you today, this morning? Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, my paper is about populism and democracy. And the paper is composed basically three parts. One is more or less theoretical conceptual part. Another is cultural part. And third part is about the empirical analysis. So since we do not have enough time, I feel that it may be better to focus on the empirical study while very shortly mentioning the first two parts. Okay. Theoretically, conceptually, as you know, there are many contrasting, diverging opinions of the role of populism with respect to democracy. Somebody says, well, populism is a driving force of democracy. Many also talk about populism as a threat, kind of obstacle to democracy, particularly this day. So it's a very ambiguous concept. So it's very difficult to draw a general conclusion about it because everything depends on particular context and time and place, you know, something like that. So about the culture in Korea, we have very strong concept of populism. We call Minjung. Minjung means grassroots people, bottom people, who are object of oppression on the one hand, but also a symbol of a people, very pure symbol of a people, as the sources of legitimation of the political authority. And in Korea, we have very strong Confucian tradition, according to which the idea of a people-based politics should be the basis of all politics, the normative idea. And we hold that concept for a long time. And on the one hand, we have this Confucian concept of people-based politics. On the other hand, we have a very strong concept of Minjung, that means grassroots people. So, you know, there's a combination of these two from the 19th century, particularly from the late 19th century onward, we have a very strong populist movement in broad sense until today, actually. So I referred to this kind of a cultural tradition in Korea, which is working until today. That is my second part. The third part is about the empirical study. So I suggest in my paper how I did, you know, so if you are interested in, please look at my paper. But when we deal with empirical problem, empirically, you know, defined problem of populism, I feel that there must be, particularly in relation to democracy, I mean, particularly, okay, we have to have two solutions. You know, one is who are populists. I'm talking about populism not at the level of a political leader, nor party. You know, somebody talk about, well, there are many populist leaders nowadays in the world. There are some populist party, you know, so we can talk about what are the characteristics of populist party or populist leader in the world, like Trump, you know, but there are many anyway. But I am sociologist. I am more concerned about the citizen. So I like to carry out an empirical study of citizen attitude or citizen behavior to determine who can be called populist and who are not, and what kind of populist attitudes emerge at the basis of civil society. That is the basic question. And how large each type of populist, and what is the role of this populism in relation to the idea of democracy. Now, about this empirical research, one thing is pretty clear. You know, who can be called populist among citizens? And I draw some questionnaire, internationally quite well known, you know, questionnaire. And this populism can be defined by two elements. One is distrust of a professional politician. You know, citizens do not trust on politician, elite or traditional professional politician also. So distrust on traditional professional politician is one axis, one element. And the other one is kind of primacy of the people, trust on people as a sources of legitimacy of power. So we can draw many interesting questionnaire, but I chose some questionnaire from the survey study done in many different countries. And in that regard, we can define who are the populist citizen very clearly. The other approach is I take political liberalism and the political one is political liberalism and political egalitarianism. Again, one is a kind of political dimension. The other one is economic dimension. It is also very well known to aspect of liberalism, and I made some questions based upon world value survey research, and we can combine these two dimensions. And then we draw some very interesting category of politician or citizen, and one of which is I call politically stabilized and neoliberal. This is one part. And the other, exactly the opposite part, is politically frustrated, egalitarian, populist. There are four different categories, but anyway, these two concepts is very important. Politically stabilized neoliberals on the one hand, and the politically frustrated egalitarian populists on the other hand. And who really support, for example, autocratic presidential rule? When we define the obstacle of democracy, we need to have some empirical indicator anyway. So in order to determine where the threat to democracy comes from, then we have to have some kind of question. And very fortunately, we have that question for a long time by world value survey research, and it shows who really support the autocratic, strong political power, like president. And Indonesia also too, Korea too, we have very strong presidential power, and therefore those who support autocratic presidential rule, which is unbounded by constitution or rule of law, that means very a danger to democracy. And who really support this autocratic presidential rule, unbounded presidential rule? Very surprisingly, I was very surprised to find that in this data, it is not the politically frustrated egalitarian populist at all. On the contrary, politically stabilized neoliberal who really enjoy something already, who is in the mainstay in the society, they support autocratic presidential rule. So it is exactly, very the opposite of our expectation. So I found this as a very interesting phenomena. And so why those people whom we call politically stabilized and neoliberal, who enjoy many things today already, really support autocratic presidential rule in Korea as well as in other places like in Turkey. So that is one very interesting argument that point that I found. The other one is in Korea, we have had very interesting kind of a confrontation of the two groups. One is we call candlelight Virgil movement. I mean, this is on page 128. You see the path analysis, of my paper. One group is candlelight Virgil movement, or candlelight Virgil movement, and the other one is the national flag movement. And these two groups, a large group, they confront each other on the downtown of Seoul. Several months continually in 2016 and 2017. Very long, persistent confrontation, but very peacefully. They don't struggle, they don't fight each other, but they come to the street, downtown of Seoul. They march in the different part, different way, but they shout, they acclaim, and it continues several months. This is exactly the populist phenomena, but they are very different orientations. One is, I said, candlelight march, candlelight Virgil movement, and the other one is the national flag. They carry a national flag. And so we have a very developed kind of questionnaire on this. And therefore, the question is, which group among these two, candlelight Virgil orientation and national flag movement, which group support autocratic presidential rule? That is empirical question. And my past analysis or regression analysis clearly shows that it is national flag orientation movement, populist movement. They very strongly support this autocratic kind of presidential rule, whereas candlelight Virgil movement participants, they don't support it. Although they are populist, they are equally populist, but nonetheless their orientation, particularly their relationship with democracy, turns out to be very, very different. So my conclusion is, well, based upon this analysis, I can say that populism or populist citizen can contribute something to democracy, at the same time can hinder democracy. So that depends on what kind of populism we are talking about. We cannot make a general conclusion at all. So in our own analysis, in Korea, we have two very opposing tendencies of populism representing civil society. And one factor really tends to support democracy. The other one may pose a threat to democracy. That is the reality of populism, particularly in relation to democracy. That is my main conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Han, for your very interesting empirical work that found seemingly conflicting findings with regard to the support towards autocratic presidential leaders in South Korea. Again, I'd like to encourage all participants, if you have questions or comments, please write down your questions or comment at Zoom and also at CSIS YouTube, and then we're gonna relay your questions to each panelist. Last but not least, I'm gonna give the screen to Mr. Arya Fernandes, researcher at the Department of Politics and Social Change at the Center, who will be speaking about the changing roles of NGOs in Indonesia and its relationship with democracy and democratization in this country. Mr. Arya Fernandes, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Okta. Good morning, everyone, all panelists and all participants. Allow me to share my presentation. Okay, I will share you my research on NGO and democratization from cooptation to collaboration. And as we know, after 2 decades of democratization process, precisely 20 years since the reformation of 1998, Indonesia successfully implemented meaningful changes in electoral and political institutions. Indonesia has held 5 democratic elections from 1999 until 2018. In 2004, the public could elect the president directly for the first time. Institutionally, there is an initiative encouraged by the NGO activists to support transparency, accountability, and public participation in the time of democratic transition process. Several new institutions are set up after the Reformation era. Among of them are the Constitutional Court, the Corruption Eradication Commission, and the Judicial Commission, and others. In a situation that has changed to become more democratic post-Reformation, NGOs and CSOs has become important actors in pushing for policy reform. A study by Balding and Gache showed that the quality of democracy influenced the pattern of NGO interaction with the government, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. In Indonesia, the NGO roles in democratic transition and consolidation process is seen from the NGOs' activist involvement in campaigning for reformation issues regarding good governance, transparency, and accountability, and strengthening democratic institution. And we see it in the next phase, several NGO activists and civil society activists were involved in designing and preparing for the increase of institutional internal capacity and become member and leaders of several national commission. In the first era of reformasi, NGO activists also suggested constitutional amendment. The goal of constitutional amendment was to strengthen democratization and presidential system through several changes. This include the implementation of direct presidential election by the public, limitation of presidential office periodization into 2 periods, and strengthening article on presidential impeachment. Before the constitutional amendment, the president and vice president are elected by the People Consultative Assembly, or MPR, and become MPR mandates without limitation regarding the president office period. Without detailed regulation on impeachment, it depends on the political power of the MPR to impeach the president. The initiative to collaborate with the government has already appeared at the beginning of the Reformation. A study conducted by Misner showed 3 successful pro-democracy groups in influencing policy, especially military reformation, women rights, and labor issues. In military reformation, civil society groups successfully pushed for reformation and professional in Indonesian National Armed Forces. They pushed for the initiative to abolish the dial function of ABRI. This was led by a group known as Kelompok Kerja Reformasi Sektor Keamanan, coordinated through the Pro Patria NGO in October 1998. The group's member consisted of Rizal Sukma, Munir, Cornelis Le, Ikrar Nusa Bakti, and others. In their activism, Pro Patria collaborated with Defense Ministry and member of DPR, while the success of women NGOs is evident from the acceptance of implementing a quota of a 30% of women representation in party management and candidacy. And finally, the institution of trade union to campaign for labor group issues. Now, our democratic performance tends to stagnate based on Freedom House report from 2014 until 2020. Indonesia is categorized as a partly free country. However, from 26 until 2014, Indonesia gained status as a free country. However, a report from the Economist Intelligence Units in 2018 also categorized Indonesia as a country with a flawed democracy. I have 2 research questions in this research. First, why do NGO change their approach and strategy to collaborate with the government? And why do some NGOs still maintain the odd vis-a-vis government approach? Second, what is the response, attitude, and accommodation of the government throughout NGOs? Has there been a change of policy on government sides? I think the drive for change for the government to involve public and NGO participation in policy making process is influenced by the desire to improve evidence-based policies. It also encourages the change and the new trend of global governance. According to Davis, the increasing of use evidence in policy is influenced by the growth of educated group in society, data availability, information technology availability, the growth of the research community, and the global competition. In response to the changing of global trend and the need for public participation, the Indonesian government has made several changes in the policy-making process. First, accommodating of public participatory in regulatory perspective to regulation accommodate public participation in policy-making process, law about the establishment of regulation, and law about the regional government. Second, the Indonesian government also an initiator and has been a member of Open Government Partnership since 2011, and the Indonesian government also encouraged a more transparent, accountable, and participatory policy process. To realize this initiative, the government established the Open Government Indonesia National Secretariat, coordinated by the Ministry of National Development Planning. For this 7 years since Indonesia joined OGP, the Indonesian government has successfully implemented several new policy reform and initiatives that provide open access to the public, like the policy budget openness, One Data Indonesia, public consultation forum, and public one map policy, and others initiative. Third, the increasing capacity of public servants and strengthening the state administration agencies. Fourth, providing access to NGOs to receive research funding or Swakelola Type 3, the government released a presidential decree number 16 about good and services procurement that support government partners and public through Swakelola Type 3 with civil society organization. With this budget, it is expected that NGOs and CSOs could participate in policy-making process. What is the reputation of the NGOs? Before 1998 Reformation, collaboration trend with policymakers were unconventional by the majority of NGO activists. The collaboration was seen as a form of government to control and co-opted by the of activists. As we know, in 1985, the New Order government issued Undang-Undang Ormas, which consists of articles that could limit or suspend Ormas. The suspension of Ormas could be done by the government without appeal in the court. Changes in political regime during the Reformation era influenced government attitude and policies throughout NGOs. For the past few years, the government has been more open to outside input. It has positioned NGOs as partner rather than cooptation. However, amid policy changes from the policy maker perspective, some of NGOs are still reluctant to collaborate and instead choose to maintain the movement as an advocacy model. They tend to take the vis-a-vis position with the policymakers. In general, the tendency for the NGOs in Indonesia is start to open up throughout collaboration with policymakers by changing their approach, priorities, and internal strategies. The push of change with the NGOs from their advocacy role to collaborative one is due to change in global funding scheme, especially after Indonesia's status change from lower middle income to upper middle income. NGOs need to survive amidst limited budget and inter-NGO competition. The study has found that internal capacity and adaptation toward change affect the pattern of NGO relation with policymakers. NGO has successfully transformed on an institutional level, have a robust internal capacity like human resources, network, strategic planning that could quickly adapt to changing situation. The institutional transformation factor influence that the extent of motivation to which NGO are willing to collaborate with the stakeholder. On the other hand, NGOs with the internal issue, such as leadership crisis, stagnant improvement, and vague strategic planning, tend to have difficulties in collaboration. The attitude, approaches, and strategic priority of NGO influence their choice to collaborate with the government or policy making and private sectors. Above are some of the best practices of several NGOs in Indonesia. First, the case of electoral reform initiated by Perludem with the codification of electoral law in 2017. The second is CETRO from 1999 until 2004. CETRO succeeded to suggest a 30% quota of female candidate and direct election in 2004. The third is the case of Perkumpulan Perkasa, from advocacy activities to engaging with multi-stakeholders to strengthen the production and dissemination of knowledge. Perkasa also changed the study pattern of issues regarding strengthening participation to applied study such as policy evaluation, monitoring, and policy promotion. And the last is the case of LSAM and KPPOD has successfully initiated the collaboration with the private sectors. Now the challenge to collaborate. The success of government collaboration with NGO is influenced by their relationship with the government. A study by HAT in Bangladesh showed that the change of government policy from cooptation to making NGO as a partner occurred due to enhancing the role of NGO in providing basic services and financial aid for the public, such as what has been done by Grameen Bank, and the significance of member of NGO in Bangladesh, they are nominated by women. In Indonesia, after two elections, the collaboration between NGO and policymakers has become more challenging due to high political fragmentation, the pragmatic and populist elite, and the declined professionalism and competence of several NGOs. Difficulties in collaboration with the government also influenced by the lengthy bureaucratic culture that has not fully opened up to the public participation and the slow process of decision making in policy makers. The CSIS Sustainability Index from a study conducted by the USAID showed the stagnation in Indonesia for the past 5 years. The CSO Sustainability Index from 2014 to until 2018, the average sustainability score in Indonesia are in moderate position. From 7 dimensions that we measure, the highest score for NGOs in Indonesia is at the dimension of advocation, and the lowest is financial ability. Challenges in collaboration is also stem from NGOs' limitation in providing reliable and high quality knowledge in due time. However, the government's ability to produce policies based on scientific data is getting stronger. The last slide, I think that two issues had still loom over the sustainability of NGOs on concern democratization and the regeneration of internal leadership. Several NGOs were unsuccessful in conducting regeneration due to dominant personal leadership, the quality of inexperienced replacement, and the absence of career, certainly after the longer leading an NGO. Also, this study has found that issues of funding impact NGOs survival due to change and reduction in funding scam from international donor agencies, and access to funding between NGOs are becoming more competitive. On a domestic level, the availability of local philanthropy to fund non-mainstream issues is not prevalent, except for issues that generate high level of public awareness. Thank you, Ekta. Back to you.
Thank you, Arya, and thank you to all the panelists who already present their own topics. Now I found three questions directed to all the panelists, and we still have a few minutes, I guess, to proceed with the Q&A. The first questions, I think, is going to be to Professor Sang Jin. There's a question for you. I still have a hard time understanding why you think populism can contribute in supporting democracy in South Korea. Maybe you can start off by explicating about what you just mentioned, the difference between candlelight movement and also national flag movement, in which one of the movement, national flag movement, you said that they tend to support autocratic presidential rules, whereas other movement, candlelight movement, doesn't really support the leader. Professor Han, I think you need to unmute. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, that is what we found out of our empirical research. It is really open question, actually. I am basing myself on citizens' attitude rather than the leaders' attitude, okay? What kind of attitude the citizen who joined these two different movements show about the political leader which they want to choose, you know. So the one reason for this difference, in my view, is that the supporter of national flag movement, they are really the supporter of the former authoritarian leader, like Park Chung-hee and Park Geun-hye, who was out, of course, you know. So they are very strong in organizing populist movement, but nonetheless, they really want to have a strong leader, like former dictator Park Chung-hee and something like that. Whereas the candlelight movement participants, although they are populist, and they do have the president now, President Moon Jae-in is their part. So they enjoy this president, their leadership, but they don't support, they don't want the president to become too much powerful to suppress democracy. But anyway, that is an open question. So this is what we found out of the research as of this year. But I would say the situation is changing very rapidly this day. We are in big struggle nowadays, and they are very strong SNS supported pro-government movement from outside. They are very strong NGO or other civil movement. They are more or less in favor of a strong government. So I think my opinion is that the situation is radically changing, somehow suggesting that the pro-governmental forces in the past now turns out to support, to be more or less dictatorial. This changing is very peculiar, very strange, and very interesting. But anyway, what I presented in my paper is what we found out of our research in the middle of this year, like June, because we had that conduct research in the mid-June of this year. Yeah. But you are right. The situation is very mobile, changing in a very interesting way. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
I don't know. That makes sense to you.
Thank you, Professor Han. I think your answer also addressed the the other questions that ask about the difference between the two movements, the candlelight and national flag movement. And then next, I think I will ask Dr. Vidhyandika to address the questions from one of our participants. Should there be one national Christian agenda that can unify divergent Christian groupings to advance their political causes more actively?
Okay, Okta, thank you for the question. I think we should kind of be cautious of using the words agenda, because like what I have mentioned earlier in my presentation, that we do have quite struggling, right, to kind of escape from stigma that of the Christianization, such a dogmatic stigma, which kind of become the embryo of the why we are being oppressed. So in terms of Christianity, which is so diverse, I think the only one which unite us is that we believe in one Savior, which is Jesus Christ, and which taught us to do love and forgiveness to other people. So I more agree to you that whatever agenda that the Christianity should have must be based on, or you're right, a more secular agenda of how to promote equality, how to express love to all religions without benefiting a particular religion, and how to express human rights. So I think we need a more secular, a more expanded understanding of Christianity and gender, rather than having their own more narrow or inclusive agenda. Or else, I mean, this should be as well be a challenging endeavor, because as I mentioned in my presentation, of the diversity of the Christianity you have, and it might be challenging as well to have them sit together and to promote a particular agenda which can unite us as Christianity above the secular elements of that. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mas Vidya. If I may, would you like to respond to the questions from our researcher, Niki Fahrizal, who is asking questions about RUU tentang perlindungan tokoh agama dan simbol agama within the Prolegnas 2021. What's your opinion about that bill?
Sorry to say, Nick, I haven't read that bill, but hopefully, I mean, whatever is substantive inside the bill, it's really, it should implement it in a more fairly way. I mean, I think if you talk about tokoh agama, you talk about the ulama, but of course we have to also talk about the other religious leaders. So I would encourage or promote that this bill could really be implemented in a more fairly way, because we have so many bills which in fact discriminate into a particular religion or particular minority.
Okay. I'm just gonna take one more questions. There's a questions for Arya Fernandes and Dr. Medelina. The same questions basically. Has there been a success story of cross-cutting case between NGO and labor unions in the process of policy making? Maybe two of you or one of you can address these questions. Arya?
Okay, I have short comments. Bonita, I don't know if there is a best practices collaboration between NGO and labor movement, but if we look at the issues, the Indonesian NGOs are more fragmented and struggle to survive. But I think in the time of the pandemics, the NGO tends to collaborate between NGOs, cross-cutting collaboration, and of course, the collaboration with the government. Thank you, Okta.
Thank you, Arya. Ibu Medelina, would you like to respond to that questions?
Yes, I think after the failure of establishing political party, labor union use cooperation and collaboration with other NGOs and CSO is as the main strategy. because mobilization of its own member is not sufficient. And we had evidence, the best practices or a good example of the coordination and collaboration between labor union and NGOs or SCOs in pushing a national agenda. As I mentioned before, that establishment of the Social Security Management Agency, BPJS, was achieved by building cooperation with other civil society and also a member of parliament. And if we notice that the member of labor union itself is now declining, so they have to also rely on the support from other CSO in pushing national agenda. For example, also for raising the minimum wage. I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Medelina. I guess I have to wrap up our discussions in the interest of time because we already passed the time limit. Thank you very much once again to all the panelists. And also thank you very much for all participants who are joining with us at Zoom and also at YouTube channel. These discussions will eventually be uploaded at our YouTube channel. So please go check it out. Subscribe if you are interested in. So thank you so much again for your time, your comments, your questions. And I'm sorry I cannot take any questions because of the time limit. So we'll see you again in the next
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Han. Please stay safe and healthy.
Professor Han.
Thank you, Okta.